Welcome to another edition of Over It with Michael English. On today's show, author, journalist Nina Burleigh. Judge a man by his questions, not by his answers. That was Voltaire. I'm your Hot Zone host, Michael English. And it's that time of year again, the season to be pleasing. Well, if you're thinking of getting me anything at all, please don't buy a 2022 calendar yet. I want to see the trailer. Well, Nina is an award-winning author and a journalist. She's written 7 books and has been published in The New Yorker, Time, New York, People, among other journals and rags. She's occasionally shellacked her hair for television, including Good Morning America, Nightline, and various programs on CNN and C-SPAN, as well as flogged books on NPR and countless radio outlets. Her first publication was for the Elgin Library in Elgin, Illinois, when she was in the 6th grade. Hallelujah. Welcome to the program, Nina Burleigh.
So great to be here.
Childhood. Haight-Ashbury, the Middle East, Amish country in Michigan. How did that work out? What was the plan there?
Well, there was no plan. I mean, my dad was a University of Chicago PhD student. My mom was an immigrant from Iraq. And they were kind of bohemian. And they decided in 1967 to pick up stakes, leave Chicago, leave the University of Chicago academic world behind, and live in the Haight-Ashbury during the Summer of Love with 3 kids under the age of 8.
Wow. And where did you fit in those 3 kids?
I was the oldest.
Ah.
And we lived in San Francisco for a few years, right near the epicenter of the scene, the Haight-Ashbury scene. And then my mom got a little fed up with it. She had a big earthquake phobia, and there were tremors all the time. So she decided to put us on a plane, and we flew to Baghdad. We lived in Baghdad for a summer. It happened to be the summer that RFK was assassinated in California, and Saddam Hussein was coming to power. A very interesting time to be there. And I have some pretty clear memories of some strange things. That was the place that kind of put me on, or made me actually understand how much I loved writing and how I was homesick for reading the English language. And my grandmother took Time magazine. So I would lie there on these, steaming hot afternoons after lunch. All the adults would go and take the nap, and I would go to this parlor room that my grandmother had and sort of look at all the things on the walls, the wooden camels and the oriental rugs, and lie there on the couch trying to feel a breeze, and then pick up Time magazine. And, I was 8 years old, and I would read it from cover to cover every week.
Wow.
And that was kind of a formative moment. I mean, it's, this American rag, but it was like a lifeline to home. My dad would every once in a while send us a box of stuff from the U.S. And so we had, Archie comics, and my mom, he'd send her like Paisley mini dresses. When we opened the box, like patchouli would come out. I was going to be sent to the British school. Right. And then Mom decided, no, don't want to raise my kids here. Dad left San Francisco. We returned from Iraq, and we lived on a farm in Amish country, Michigan. Dad, who was kind of a beatnik hippie writer, taught school at the Amish school, and Mom taught school at the non-Amish school that we went to. And so we lived there for about 4 or 5 years, and that was my childhood in the woods of Michigan.
Did he influence you to be a writer, do you suppose?
Oh, absolutely. Both my parents did.
The article that stood out to me as I was scanning some of the highlights was Sons of Anarchy, the Gretchen Whitmer kidnapping plot. My God, that was gripping. And true, every bit of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that story caught my eye when the arrests happened in the fall of 2020. And I read the article, and I thought, wow, these guys lived 2 counties over from where I played in the woods. I played Army in the woods. I just didn't have real guns. We played Army, and we played all sorts of games out in the forest. I grew up there.
You mentioned that in the article. You said, yeah, but you forgot, you left Army in the woods, and these guys couldn't leave it alone.
Well, that's what the militias are about.
Yeah.
They don't want to give up playing Army. They idolize and fetishize the military. And in this case, that's how they got caught. They live in this kind of siloed off, like a lot of our fellow Americans do, information camp where they think that the left is totalitarian and is about to take their guns and, lock them up in FEMA camps. And the lockdown that Governor Whitmer instituted was, for them, the sign that totalitarianism was coming and that they were going to have to give up their guns and all their other rights. So they decided to plot to kidnap her, and they worked at it. They talked about it all summer of 2020, and by the fall, they had been surveilling her little vacation home in northern Michigan, and they got caught because they had allowed into their group an actual Iraq War wounded combat veteran, and that guy was. He found them because Facebook's algorithm, as we now know, pushes people towards the more and more extreme websites or more and more extreme views because that's where they get the most eyeballs
action
and the longest eyeballs on their website, on their platform. So he was pushed towards this group. He was a Second Amendment enthusiast, and he met with them, and pretty soon realized, wow, they're just talking about shooting cops. They are really kind of scary. And so he told a cop friend of his in Flint, and that guy called the FBI. And then the FBI called him and said, would you wear a wire and keep going with this group?
That's where it gets interesting.
Did. And he, so now we have, thousands of hours of audio and encrypted chats transcribed that in which they're talking about kidnapping the governor and the things they would love to do with her once they caught her. And the thing that's so interesting about it is, among other things, is that it is the germ of the 1/6 fascist insurrection. I mean, these guys had the same fantasy of arresting, trying for treason, and executing elected officials. And they were participants in the armed, I call it an assault, but the entry of all these armed men into the Lansing, the state capital of Michigan in Lansing, which was a little mini 1/6, where we saw it. It was live streamed on in spring of 2020 when everybody was in lockdown. We were watching this, and everybody was agog. I mean, everybody who didn't understand that 20 states in the U.S. allow armed people to bring loaded weapons into their state capitals, but carrying a sign in will get you arrested.
Blows my mind.
That's the country we live in.
When you're at a cocktail party or at a social function, how do you introduce yourself as, like when someone says, what do you do? Do you say writer, producer, creator, investigative journalist? What do you say?
I usually say writer or journalist.
Yeah.
And, I've been a journalist for most of my career. I've branched out a little bit into
TV.
TV, and, I've written a lot of books, but yeah, writer.
Speaking of television, and I know we just were, the show series Epstein's Shadow, Ghislaine Maxwell, looks and feels intriguing and page-turning indeed. You're an executive producer, for Christ's sake. That's a nice place to be.
Yeah, it was a great way to jump into TV. And
at the top.
I had written about Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell for Rolling Stone.
Right.
And
I read
knew
that.
the documents pretty well, knew what the charges were, and was just intrigued by it. And one of the producers asked if I would come on. It was a terrific experience, and one of the things I learned is that it's, TV pays 50 times more than print journalism, and it's at least 1/10 of the work.
Just for a second, back to the Rolling Stone article we were just talking about. You ended the article with this great quote: "The mystery of Ghislaine Maxwell might never be solved, but her story exposes a shadow world of borderless wealth, where operators face off against influencers, and secrets are worth money, and civilian laws don't always apply." I read that to somebody at work today, and they're like, damn right. And so I want to get to the book. Your titles of your books, my gosh, they're great. They're like, they have a rhythm to them almost, like a song or a poem. Maybe that's the dad influence. But Virus, Vaccinations, the CDC, and the Hijacking of America's Response to the Pandemic. That's what we're talking about today. When you were writing this book, did you feel like you were writing it with an end, like a hopeful, like, hey, once this goes to publish and it goes out, this will be history?
I got a call from the publisher around Thanksgiving last year as the vaccinations were about to be approved by the FDA. The publisher of Seven Stories Press called and said, would you write me a book about the race to the vaccine in 3 months? It doesn't have to be a long book, but can you do it by March? I want it to be out in May. And I said, sure. I've done some science writing. It's not my number one thing, but and I'm quite interested in science. And I said, yeah, I'll do it. But you have to let me do 2 things with the book. In addition, I have got to be able to write about one chapter about how the Trump regime handled this situation. Malignant, deliberate activity, not chaos. Vulture capitalism, a callous ideology that they got to put into practice. And then I said, I also need to talk about the misinformation, disinformation, conspiracy theory campaign.
And they said okay to that?
And he said yes. So I commenced, I hired an assistant Stanford microbiology PhD student who got to be my RNA for Dummies person. I talked to her every day until I understood what this new platform was, the mRNA platform. And I learned a lot about the history. I read a lot and learned a lot about the history of vaccines. And it's really fascinating. It's only been 250 years or so since the human race had any defense against infectious disease. It's only been 250 years. The first vaccine the word vaccine comes from the word vaca, word for cow.
Uh-huh.
Because the first vaccine...
Smallpox.
The first vaccine was, they discovered that a weaker version of smallpox,
right,
the cowpox, could be given to people and they would survive smallpox.
This was in the late 1700s.
Yes. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. That was kind of what they understood about this, the early vaccines. So that was in the late 1700s. It took until the mid 1800s before people started grinding lenses to a point where they could see microscopic things. And that only in the mid 1800s did you start to have people like Louis Pasteur looking at the fluid, the blood of people who've been infected with rabies or cholera or tuberculosis and starting to say, oh wait, there are these tiny little things. In everybody who dies of cholera, there's this tiny little thing. So we're only 150 years beyond the human race understanding what germs are, what the causes of infectious diseases are. And now we're at this point. We have made such strides that scientists are now able to genetically sequence these tiny little enemies and create synthetic sequences of proteins that they can inject into us that tell the body, if you see something that looks like this, defend against it.
Mm-hmm.
And these mRNA, the messenger RNA, these sequences of proteins, these atomic medicine, they're not at all like the vaccine that the cow vaccine was. They're not at all like it because they can't kill you. All the vaccines up until this platform
was a weakened version of...
It was a weakened version of polio. It was a weakened version of rabies.
Right.
It's a weakened version of the flu, right? This is a completely new platform. And this is why it drives me nuts to see people rejecting it. Because, people go to church on Sunday and pray to a superstitious being in the sky. And they should be down on their knees thanking these anonymous researchers and scientists who have created
Shanghaied
this life-saving platform that actually is a milestone in medicine, and that actually is going to change the way that we respond to infectious disease and cancers and other things going forward.
50,000 words in 3 months. That was a fast write. I mean, and this research, the way you're describing
I'm
it.
writing like the wind. It's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like to sit down in my chair and write as fast as I
Where
can.
do you?
So I can get.
Where's your favorite place to write? Do you have a little spot?
I do. Well, I have a little cabin that I've been heating with a wood stove up there.
You put a little sign out, "Do not disturb," that kind of thing.
Nobody dares come near it, and there's no internet in it. The United States was the most prepared to deal with the pandemic. We had pandemic preparedness community here that was strong, and they knew what was coming, and they knew what they were supposed to do. I mean, yes, people made mistakes with the WHO, and CDC made mistakes with the test. They made mistakes with whether or not to wear the masks. But there was this whole community of people who understood, here's what you're supposed to do. And in fact, they had done tabletop exercises and so on. They did not have somebody in the White House to call because the White House had gotten rid of their scientists and replaced them with extreme right-wing evangelical Christians,
cronies,
and superstitious people and cronies.
Suspicious.
So there were pandemic preparedness community people who were on these, listservs, who were communicating with each other. They didn't know who to communicate with at the CDC or the White House. The CDC was, Birx and Redfield, the doctors who ran the COVID response for Trump. They're evangelical Christians. I mean, they had kicked out the scientists. The Biden administration has a genetic scientist. I mean, let's just for a second talk again about the genetic science behind this. The advances in understanding DNA, RNA, so this is all very recent. It's like the last 20 years. It's just catapulted further and further on. It's like they speak a different language. I can't explain to you what DNA is. I don't know any. It's like it's a different language, and that's one of the reasons why you have all of these people across the country so suspicious, because it's very difficult for the community to understand what this is. Biden has a genetic scientist as his chief scientist. I mean, that's the guy in the White. There is someone in the White House. It's not the Biden administration's fault that this country is filled with people who are resisting.
No,
it's Fox News, and it's Fox News playing the playbook of the Trump regime, which is as much chaos as we can muster in this country until the 2022 election is good for us. That's why they're so pleased that in the state of Michigan, for example, right now, again, we're at the end of 21 now. We're on to 2 years of the pandemic. Hospitals again in the state of Michigan and other states, but I'm bringing up Michigan because I was just reading about it last night. Overwhelmed, communities losing people, families losing people. There are other reasons why the healthcare system is floundering. That has to do with the fact that we don't have a nationalized healthcare system. The Biden administration has tried, and you can, if you're in the state of Michigan, go and get yourself a vaccine. And the hospitals don't have to be in that situation.
A friend of mine asked me the other day, what's the difference, Mike, between misinformation and disinformation? Now, as a writer and as a wordsmith, you're going to tell me, but I think the American public thinks like this, perhaps. I feel disinformation is a total lie. It's basically, that apple's not red, it's purple, and that's it. It's outright deceit, pretty much brought on by a government or a power group out to destroy its people or its adversaries. Whereas misinformation is a little trickier. It's a little more clever. It's more manipulative of facts, giving the listener half of the story, part of the truth, and letting the listener kind of come up with his own interpretation. So the misinformation just becomes a tool for who's giving it to guide the masses to what they want. Is that a fair?
I think that's a very good
close.
explanation. Disinformation is, I guess, it's deliberate.
This much I do know. Until further notice, the days of the week will be known as this day, that day, the other day, someday, yesterday, today, and the next day.
Yeah, no more weekends. I don't even know what day of the week it is most of the time.
But the other day, I went into a real bookstore, Shakespeare and Company, Upper West Side, Manhattan, and I actually bought Virus. I asked for it, and they found it, and bang, there it was. Are bookstores going by the way of the record store? Or I guess the record store is having a little bit of a comeback because of the virus, but bookstores for a while were taking a beating. Are they having a comeback? Could they have a comeback? They deserve a comeback.
Geez, I don't know. I'm one of those, I write books, but I'm one of those people who I read mostly on the Kindle. I hate to say it. I give Jeff Bezos so much money.
Why did they call it a Kindle?
I guess because it's like fuel for the mind.
So today, last thing you read?
Today, yeah. I'm reading Nabokov's Speak Memory. About 80,000 words into my own memoir. I call it my autobiography because I basically just decided a couple of years ago to try to write down every single thing I remembered from childhood on, because I was afraid I was going to start to forget it. And so I've gotten pretty far into it.
I skipped over a couple of the books in your catalog that I wanted to mention in this interview, and one of the titles that intrigued me, the storyline definitely has intrigued me for a while, the Mary Pinchot-Meyer story. The title is The Life of the Unsolved Murder of Mary Pinchot-Meyer. Mm-hmm. It's got everything, folks. Timothy Leary, LSD, Allen Ginsberg, JFK. I mean, the story does. I haven't read her book. Tell me, what's your interpretation of who killed her?
It is an unsolved murder, and it left an enduring conspiracy theory about the CIA that has really probably one of the earliest conspiracy theories about the deep state. And you're right. I mean, she was dropping acid with Timothy Leary. I interviewed him 2 months before he died. That was a trip. And, I did interviews with people who were her contemporaries in Georgetown in the late, the late 90s. Really old grand dames who spoke with these 1930s actress accents. I guess it's kind of a version of Long Island Lockjaw. It's a case that occurred during she was murdered 10 days after the Warren Commission report came out, which is one of the reasons that there's so much conspiracy theory about it. 1964. And in 1965, a black day laborer was put on trial in Washington, represented by a black female attorney, very unusual at the time. And she was up against the entire white establishment. I mean, there were all these men in gray suits in the back. Yeah. She was a CIA wife. The victim was a CIA wife, in addition to being a Kennedy mistress, in addition to being somebody who had dropped acid with Timothy Leary, in addition to being somebody whose diary was stolen by the chief counterintelligence CIA agent the night of the murder. So there are lots of reasons why there would be conspiracy theories lasting. And we're actually working on making a series about it.
Last song you listened to today, yesterday, this week?
You know what the song I like to listen to once a day is California Dreamin'. I used to sing along to Gladys Knight and the Pips.
With the hairbrush.
With the hairbrush, and I had my dogs or my kids, and I would try to get them to be the Pips. Misanthropy. I have a tendency to suspect that my fellow humans are not...
on the up and up.
Not a great lover of mankind.
Okay. Hey, Baskin-Robbins called, and they're about to create a 30-second ice cream flavor using your name. What would they call it, and what would it taste like?
Well, you could call it the Ninochka. Mm-hmm. That was my mom's nickname for me. And I guess it would be cardamom and, cardamom flavored, because I am half Middle Eastern and half Scandinavian, and both those areas use a lot of cardamom. What have I regretted? Well, I didn't learn French. Okay. I'm not fluent in French, and I lived there for 2 years.
I regret not forwarding that email to those 10 people back in March of 2020. I'm convinced that's what started this whole freaking thing. No?
Could be.
Speaking of outdoors and being half naked, you look very healthy. What is your workout routine? What do you do? Walk all over the place? Or
I can't
run.
I do. My job is sitting in the chair.
I know.
Right. And one of the reasons I so loved writing that last book was that I could write it. I wrote it so fast, and it was short. And I just like to sit in my chair for a while. And then I guess I'm in like a 70-30 work to
stretch.
Work to recreation.
Right.
And I'm talking, I can do 30% of my day sitting in the chair, and the other 70 running around, walking, biking,
skiing,
Nordic skiing, taking the dog out.
Oh, I want to do some of that this year.
My dog can pull me on my skis, and I Instagrammed it, and somebody sent me an email afterwards and said, that's a sport.
It is.
In Scandinavia.
It is.
And
they
it's
wrapped
called Hundyring.
Yeah.
Yes. And they have these like leashes. So that's my new goal this year.
Okay.
I had been holding on to the leash, but I think the dog is ready for an actual
harness
leash.
Right, to harness up to you.
That's going to be how I spend my winter. In fact, I spend a lot more of my time having fun. Like my next project is I'm going to go down to Mexico, to Zihuatanejo, and research and write about Timothy Leary's LSD community down there. In 1961, 62, he took a bunch of experimentalists, I guess, down there. I think Richard Alpert ended up there too. And they dropped acid 24/7 for months and months until the Mexicans kicked them out. The resort that they took over is still there. And I am attracted to the dark side. I would say that.
Yeah. Like if your books could curse at me, I think they'd tell me to go F off every now and then.
I'm not one of the wicked dipshits that you know. All that pressure got you down. I'm like, what? Where's that line from? And I Googled it, and it's Le Freak, C'est Chic.
Oh, wow.
And I Googled it. I pulled it up on YouTube.
Uh-huh.
That is a great song.
Absolutely.
It is a great
Neil
song.
Rogers.
And I sent it off to her. And I said, turn this up.
Now, are you strapped down with a bulletproof vest when you do some of these assignments? Are you
never
helmet, anything?
Never worn a bullet, but I'm not a war correspondent. In 2003, when Shock and Awe started, I was pregnant with my daughter, and we were living in Paris, and I did not go to Iraq. And in fact, I haven't been back there since that war.
Oh, my.
I spent a lot of time there before, but I have not gone back. And I would like to go back at some point.
Oh, I bet.
I think I should get my passport now.
The more I read and the more I acquire, the more I realize I know absolutely nothing.
Όλα ακούγονται μαύρα κι άραχνα.